Welcome to the Sadikhov CCVP LABS video series. My name is Sunfish, which is my username at Sadikhov, of course. In this video, we want to take a look at how to install the Cisco Unified Communications Manager 7.x as a virtual machine for our home labs. So what do we need? First of all, I'm using VMware Server 1.0.10 running on a Windows Server 2003 R2. I also tried initially to use the VMware Server, the current version 2.0.2 on a Server 2008 R2 machine, but actually the installation failed because the software did not realize the VMware environment. So I always ran into some fatal errors. Not sure whether there is a solution to that, but I know that this combination that I'm using here is working. Then, of course, we need the CUCM software, either the installation DVD or an ISO image file. The version that you can download directly from Cisco with a CCO account does not work for this purpose because it's not bootable, so it only works for upgrade scenarios, which means you either need to get the DVD from a colleague from work or the bootable ISO image file from somewhere. And if you know how to use Google, I'm sure you will find it. The host settings I'm going to use for the installation: 2 processors, 2 gig RAM, an 80 gig virtual disk. Those are my typical standard settings. I know that those settings also work for the new and upcoming CUCM 8.0 version. There are some people using just one processor, maybe 1.5 gig RAM and a little bit smaller virtual disk. That might work, but I know those settings are okay, so I simply use those ones. So let's go straight to the virtual server console. We want to set up a new virtual machine, and we want to customize it. All the CUCM versions since 5.x are running on Red Hat Linux. We want to give it a name, so I name this one Sadikhov Publisher. I don't want to make it a private virtual machine. Simply use my user account on the server. So 2 processors, 2 gigabit of RAM, as previously mentioned. We want to use bridged networking because otherwise the phones won't be able to contact our virtual machine. We have to use the LSI Logic SCSI adapter right here because if you try to use the bus logic adapter, you will run into some fatal errors during installation, so LSI is the one that works. We want to create a new virtual disk, SCSI of course, 80 gig RAM. I want to make it a dynamically growing one. Some people use this option to split into 2 gig files because it gives a little bit better performance, but I've never seen any necessity to do that. Also a name for our virtual disk. Again, I name it Sadikhov Pop. So now we need to point our virtual machine to the ISO image, CUCM 713. That's the one we are going to use. It has to be bootable, as previously mentioned. let's start the machine. If it's not bootable, the ISO image you're trying to use, it will simply fail right here. So this one is booting up fine. The installation takes in total roughly about 1 hour on my server. So we don't want to perform a media check right here because we are using an ISO image. I also tried to use the original installation DVD 1 or 2 times at the beginning, but I noticed that there is a high possibility to run into some errors during installation. So I always use the ISO image now, and that does not require the media check, of course. So the installation routine is now checking the server hardware. If you try to install this software on a physical machine, then this physical machine must be Cisco certified. Otherwise, this detection will run into a fatal error. In our case, we are now using VMware, so that should be fine. We should get a message in about 2-3 minutes from now that the VMware environment was detected, and then installation will continue. Also, you have no chance to use, for example, Hyper-V. Only the VMware environment is accepted by this detection routine. A few people also reported that they ran into a problem when they tried to set up a virtual machine on an AMD system. So you might have to use an Intel CPU for the installation of the virtual machine. But once your virtual machine is up and running, you can start that virtual machine then later on AMD hardware as well. So this problem is only installation related. So there was a quick message that VMware was detected. We now can select to install the CUCM machine. This is a fresh install, so there is no previous version. So we want to proceed with the installation. This platform installation wizard will now guide us through the necessary configuration steps. You can skip it if you want, then you will get a clean installation without any configuration. And as soon as you power on the machine the first time, then you have the chance to do all the configuration steps. But we want to proceed now with the configuration. We don't have any upgrade patches right now. And also, we do not have any backup from a previous Windows version. So if you want to migrate from, for example, 4.x versions that were running on Windows, then you can take a backup of those Windows installations and use this data here for setting up the new Linux-based version. We do a basic install. Let's check for some suitable time zone. I'm in Europe, so let's say maybe, well, let's choose Berlin. We keep the standard settings, so auto negotiation. There's also no need for us to change the MTU size. We don't want to use DHCP on this machine, just like any key servers. We should set up some static IP addresses. So let's give it a host name. So we call this machine SK-POP. IP address 178.170 with a class C mask 5255255.0 and the gateway address 688.1. We don't want to use DNS on this machine. In general, we always should statically configure any IP addresses on our voice service, because using DNS simply introduces another point of failure. So I don't want to use DNS. But if you use DNS, you have to make sure that the DNS server is valid and reachable, because if you enter an IP address for the DNS server, the installation will test reachability, and if the DNS server does not answer, then installation will run into a fatal error and you have to start from scratch once again. The admin account with a complex password. Our organization, so this machine Sadikhov.com, unit IT. So the organization, then for the location, we have chosen Berlin. State. And then let's move up to Germany. This is, of course, the first cluster, the first node in the cluster, our publisher. NTP. I enter the IP address of my NTP server in the network. That's the .10. Well, the NTP. The database access security configuration password that is used by any additional service that we put into our clusters to verify that they are allowed to talk to our publisher. We don't want to use SMTP on this machine. We need to set up our application user. I choose CUCM admin with another complex secret password. Platform configuration is complete. Clicking OK will now start the installation process, which includes a couple of reboots of the virtual machine. There is no way back, so we have to make sure that all our settings are valid, especially if you want to use things like DNS. Now is the time to check whether everything is properly configured. Otherwise, we will get some errors later on. So I'm clicking here OK. The installation process will now roughly take another 60 minutes or so. So I'll pause the video right now and pick up once the installation is complete. So installation has completed successfully.